This is a podcast from the South China Morning Post. What do you remember of April 29th, 2020? Do you remember it was the day US Vice President Mike Pence visited the Mayo Clinic and didn't wear a mask?
Thank you. So you work here at Mayo? Yes, I do.
But the video is also causing a stir because, as you can see, what's missing? He's not wearing a mask. Everyone else is. The Mayo Clinic.
Did you tweet about Gigi Hadid being pregnant?
Congratulations on expecting a baby. This is the best news ever.
Thank you so much.
Or Beyonce's new remix of Stallion? On April 29th this year, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo announced the U.S. would start demanding what it called a clean path for all 5G network traffic going into and out of U.S. diplomatic facilities around the world. And by that, he meant using any computing or storage equipment from Chinese companies like Huawei and CTE. Maybe you didn't hear that announcement. Just over a week ago, Mike Pompeo escalated the Trump administration's idea to a clean network and announced a new policy of 5 more things they wanted to be clean. Along with Clean Path, the US government now wanted Clean Carrier, Clean Store, Clean Cloud, Clean Apps, and Clean Cable. But maybe you didn't hear that announcement either. Maybe what you heard was something like this.
So the President of the United States just banned TikTok.
Our TikTok community is in crisis.
TikTok, with its viral dance routines and political activism videos, is a favorite among teenagers worldwide.
TikTok's gone. TikTok's never coming back. I'm gonna miss it.
All I need is a few seconds of your time. Right now, TikTok is on the verge of being banned in the US, and I'm starting a video petition with #SaveTikTok.
So it'll close down on September 15th unless Microsoft or somebody else is able to buy it.
Was he upset that its users sabotaged his campaign rally in Oklahoma? Was he upset that comedian Sarah Cooper makes hilarious videos making fun of him?
Then I started doing lip syncing, and then Trump is on television every day during these daily coronavirus task force meetings.
Or was it really an issue of national security, something Mike Pompeo announced as,
with parent companies based in China, apps like TikTok, WeChat, and others are significant threats to personal data of American citizens, not to mention tools for CCP content censorship.
Either way, there was a second part of the announcement that sent shockwaves through families, communities, and businesses in the United States as well as China. It is the executive order stating WeChat faces the same deadline as TikTok. Transactions with WeChat in the US will be banned.
You use it for texting, shopping, translating Chinese text to English, social media, paying bills, sharing your location.
How many people does this affect? This week, the analytics company Apptopia reported there are 19 million daily users of WeChat in the US alone. What, you might ask, are people doing on WeChat? Maybe you have heard about WeChat. Maybe you have heard of it as something that is sort of like Facebook, sort of like WhatsApp, sort of like Skype. But there's a lot more to it than that. Welcome to our latest edition of Inside China. My name is Mimi Lau.
My name is Kinling Lo. This week, we're taking you to Shenzhen, the high-tech megacity just over the border from Hong Kong that is home of Tencent, the company behind WeChat.
So theoretically, having WeChat in Apple's app stores, that counts as transactions. And if they have to remove WeChat from the app stores, meaning if people can no longer download it, people may have to face a choice. They're choosing Apple iPhones or WeChat.
It's your bank, your storefront, your way of getting around town, as well as your way of talking to your friends and family. We are going to introduce you to a group of Chinese immigrants in the United States who were the first to realize WeChat's potential for American political discussion.
First generation migrant from the People's Republic of China just have conservative views on race, on gender, on religion, on a wide range of things. And they find that their views are quite compatible with the kind of views that are pushed by Trump. And so, WeChat became a platform where a lot of Trump fans, the Chinese word for it is Trumpfen, the Trump's fan, engage in a lot of sort of disinformation, if you like.
And we're going to meet the man whose organization has been investigating the links between WeChat and China's system of censorship.
And they think, well, nothing's going on. I'm just sharing content. I don't see any observable interference. They don't know that at the same time, that data is being collected by WeChat proper. It's taken to its servers and used to help better refine the database and the algorithms that then are used to filter, to intercept and remove content that is politically sensitive.
Mimi, you were actually one of the very first people I've added on WeChat. Do you remember the year that WeChat started?
Yeah, I remember I was still a Guangzhou correspondent for the South China Morning Post back in 2011. And then there was this huge hype. Everyone in China was talking about, oh, you got to get on WeChat, you got to get this app. Back then, everyone was largely relying on the QQ. That was an instant chatting app. So I hesitantly got onto WeChat and I realized my contact list just starting to expand exponentially. Everyone is connected. I meet cool journalists there, experts, and then gradually that contact list just starting to grow, expanding to my local vendors, which I would use my WeChat to pay my phone bills, my power bills, and buy grocery, and then just become the everything app that Chinese people cannot do without.
Let's get our producer Jared to give you a quick timeline of WeChat over the past decade.
January 2011. Tencent starts an instant messaging service called Weixin. There's no English word for it yet. April 2012. Weixin officially becomes WeChat. An English language version is already available, but now it has updates in Thai, Vietnamese, Indonesian, and Portuguese. Meanwhile, in April 2012, Facebook announces plans to buy Instagram. July 2012. WeChat introduces voice and video calls. August 2012. WeChat introduces QR codes and opens up to commercial businesses. Chinese businesses and companies around the world all rush to get onto WeChat so they can start promoting their brands to customers in China. But the real revolution comes a year later, when WeChat brings in the WeChat wallet, allowing users to connect their accounts to Chinese credit card and debit card accounts. December 2013, Cambridge academic Alexander Kogan and his company release an app on Facebook called Digital Life. It's a survey which results in a data set of some tens of millions of Facebook users being collected by this personality quiz. Kogan later passes this information onto a voter profiling firm named Cambridge Analytica, which at one point claimed, but now denies, that it used this data to help create political ads for Donald Trump's 2016 presidential election bid. 2014 is the year where WeChat starts to really revolutionise mobile payments. Stores are allowed to open up accounts inside WeChat to sell their products and accept payments via WeChat. It takes another 2 years for Venmo in the USA to allow merchants to accept payments in the same manner. 2014 was also the year WeChat allowed people to deposit money into their friends' bank accounts using the app. In 2015, the first big revelation about interference in WeChat posts is revealed by the Citizen Lab, based in Toronto. Their investigation shows that some posts by brands and companies are being removed, and also that some posts are just never appearing. By late 2017, WeChat reports 1 billion monthly users, and in the city of Guangzhou, people are now allowed to store their national ID cards in their app using facial recognition.
So back to the present. Last week, Donald Trump sent this letter to the U.S. Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, about his executive order.
WeChat, a messaging, social media, and electronic payment application owned by the Chinese company Tencent Holdings Limited, reportedly has over 1 billion users worldwide, including users in the United States. Like TikTok, WeChat automatically captures vast swaths of information from its users, threatens to allow the Chinese Communist Party access to Americans' personal and proprietary information. In addition, WeChat captures the personal and proprietary information of Chinese nationals visiting the United States, thereby allowing the Chinese Communist Party a mechanism for keeping tabs on Chinese citizens who may be enjoying the benefits of a free society for the first time in their lives. WeChat, like TikTok, also reportedly censors content that the Chinese Communist Party deems politically sensitive, and may also be used for disinformation campaigns that benefit the Chinese Communist Party.
Let's find out what's happened in Shenzhen since Trump's announcement.
So we've got here with us Phoebe Zhang, my colleague from the China desk, to talk to us about WeChat. Phoebe, do you remember a time before WeChat? Was there a year that you remember when everything changed?
Oh, sure. I even remember a year before all the smartphone. That ancient. Before WeChat, we had to contact people through text messaging or through calling or just meet up with them. And I think one year, suddenly, all of my friends told me, hey, register as WeChat so we can get in touch with each other. And it just seems within weeks, everybody had WeChat. So I just felt out of date if I didn't have that. So I registered it. And I think it was 2014 when WeChat had all the mobile payment, electronic red envelopes. So that Chinese New Year, everybody has been sending red envelopes in WeChat groups to each other. And they sometimes people even send electronic greetings to each other. Because before that, I remember every year on Chinese New Year's Day, we had to dedicate a period of time where you basically sit down and call everybody that you know. But that year, it's like all the messages just popped up in WeChat groups.
So Phoebe, everyone knows Chinese New Year is a really big deal for all of us in China. Can you unpack for us how WeChat actually changed that cultural landscape on red envelopes?
Yeah, sure. So red envelopes are the money that usually the elderly hand to the children during Chinese New Year for good luck. It can range anywhere between a few dollars to a few hundred. And WeChat has enabled people to pay that electronically, so they can send to each other with a WeChat message, and it has the shape of a red envelope, and you open it and the money automatically goes into your bank account that's associated with your WeChat account. So basically you don't even have to meet that person, you can just send it online.
Right, and why is that better than the old traditional way of just senior people handing younger people the real actual money in envelopes?
I think for one thing, people don't really have to be together physically in order to receive that. It has made family gatherings and staying in touch so much easier. At the same time, WeChat has many modes that you can send the envelope to. Like you can send it in a group, you can divide the envelopes equally to 10 shares, or you can do it popcorn style. Some people can get bigger shares, some people smaller shares. It made it all fun.
So what Phoebe talked to us about was back then in 2014, when WeChat first launched all their digital payments, including their digital red envelopes. But last week, after Trump's announcement to ban WeChat in the US, Phoebe, can you take us through the sentiment you've been hearing from, say, your contacts or maybe even your friends and families?
Yes, so I've been talking to some students both in China and in the US, and apparently they were not very happy about it because they're very fearful that they may lose touch with their friends and family back home, or may not receive money through WeChat. The Chinese students in the US told me that they might have to think about switching to other phones because they might not be able to contact their families anymore. Also, a lot of people are able to run businesses through WeChat because they can stay in touch with their contacts overseas. It's made it so much easier, and they can get loans, and there are shops on WeChat that people can advertise, and then they can just buy on WeChat. And it's a whole business environment running on this program. So some of the business people who had regular contacts with clients in foreign countries, they're really afraid that they might lose those clients. But I think in general, the business people, they have more ways of dealing with this. They could get in touch through email, through WhatsApp, through some of the other social media platforms. One of the African businessmen that I talked to in China, he told me that when the Chinese government banned Facebook and WhatsApp, he had to switch to other means as well. So he thinks the same thing will probably happen in the future.
Phoebe, earlier you wrote about a story on how Chinese iPhone users may actually face a dilemma if Trump's announcement to remove WeChat will come into place. But how is that related if WeChat is removed in the US?
I think a lot of people are confused about that because Trump wasn't clear with his words. He said transactions between American companies and Tencent is banned. So theoretically, having WeChat in Apple's app stores, that counts as transactions. And if they have to remove WeChat from the app stores, meaning if people can no longer download it, people may have to face a choice. Choosing Apple iPhones or WeChat.
So Phoebe, you live in Shenzhen, basically China's tech hub. Do everyone in Shenzhen use this iPhone?
I think a lot of people do. When I go out on the streets, I see a lot of people carry iPhones, and then I hear the very familiar tone. And also Huaqiangbei, the manufacturing hub in Shenzhen, I think if you go there and then you can get an iPhone assembled within a few hours.
Wait, Phoebe, so let me get this straight. So you're telling me that with Trump's ban, even if people in Shenzhen are able to get the iPhone assembled in a few hours and buy the iPhone, but they won't be able to receive red packets from WeChat anymore.
That's right. They may not be even able to download WeChat from the app stores in the future.
So with this situation, Phoebe, do you think that the Huawei and Xiaomi phones are going to be all popular again?
I think a lot of people are opting to switch out of iPhones if they can use WeChat because it's become such an essential part of people's lives. It's not just a messaging tool. It's like from the moment you wake up to when you go to sleep, your life depends on it.
So Phoebe, with the September 15 deadline looming, would you be considering buying a new phone such as Android for you to be effectively using WeChat?
Actually, I don't have to. I already have 2 phones. That's the minimum requirement for being a reporter in China.
Well, thank you so much, Phoebe, for your time. Once again, we look forward to bringing you back in the future.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Just a quick update on the changes at our South China Morning Post website, scmp.com. You know these are very challenging times for media and news organizations around the world.
Along with other outlets, we are changing our business model at scmp.com. You'll get to access the first few articles for free, and then you'll be asked to subscribe.
And that doesn't change your access to our podcast. But subscribing us does make a difference to ensuring our team at the China desk, as well as all our colleagues here at the SCMP, can continue bringing you high-quality journalism 24 hours a day from across China and around the world.
So let's get a bit deeper into how WeChat is being used by Chinese immigrants around the world, especially in the USA. Let me introduce you to someone who's been studying what Chinese immigrants talk about on WeChat.
My name is Wanning Sun, and I'm a professor of communication at School of Communication at University of Technology, Sydney, in Australia.
Professor Wanning Sun does a lot of work on the use of WeChat in Australia. She can tell you a lot about how the Australian Prime Minister as well as the opposition parties all have their own WeChat accounts to talk to Chinese Australians. But she's also a member of many WeChat groups in America and has been observing the discussion happening ever since Donald Trump's executive order targeting WeChat.
There's a lot of speculation and a lot of sort of guess about what's happening. And that's the kind of sort of operational and logistic side. On the other hand, people just sort of started to lament that, even before it disappears, how sad it would be and how unfortunate it would be that a very key sort of platform connection that the Chinese diaspora have with China on one hand and with the other Chinese diasporic communities in the other part of the world would be taken away from them. So it's a lot of shock and horror, to be honest with you. But there is also some conversation, although not the sort of among the majority, but there is some people say, how can Trump do this to us? And then some other people responded by saying, well, China has banned all sorts of social medias from the West, like from Facebook to YouTube. And, why can't America ban WeChat? And now you're shocked, but aren't you shocked about what China has done to Western media? So you can tell even from just people's response to this ban in the context of WeChat, the political points of view also come through. So there's wide range of discussions.
Now, the USA is the #1 destination for Chinese immigrants. And in the US, Chinese people are the 3rd largest immigrant group after Mexican and Indian people. According to the US Census Bureau, as of 2018, there is about 5.5 million residents of the US who are Chinese. Now, since 2012, more and more of those people are using WeChat not just to keep in contact with their families back in mainland China. They're using it to keep up to date with everything that's happening in China. But something happened during the 2016 US presidential election, which indicated a new tone in discussion on WeChat groups by Chinese Americans. People started to talk about politics, and these people were Trump voters.
During the election in 2016, it was a conservative segment of the Chinese diaspora, particularly the first-generation migrants from the People's Republic of China, who are also have conservative views on race, on gender, on religion, on a wide range of things, and they find that their views are quite compatible with the kind of views that are pushed by Trump. And so, WeChat became a platform where a lot of Trump fan, the Chinese word for it is Trumpfen, the Trump's fan, actually engage in a lot of sort of disinformation, if you like, and to promote Trump's agenda. So that is on the right, and that's not to say that the so-called liberals in the U.S. or the liberal democratic supporters on the left are not using WeChat. They are also using WeChat to mobilize, to promote, and to argue and communicate with fellow Chinese in America. But on the whole, based on last couple of years, it seems that it is the politics on the right, conservative politics, that tend to have taken advantage of WeChat. They have greater reach, their volume is higher, they're more vociferous, and they're more vocal, and then they have managed to do it more effectively.
The first Chinese Americans to start using WeChat to discuss American politics were the first-generation immigrants, and they were fans of Donald Trump. And now in Australia, WeChat was used very strategically, very professionally by conservative political groups to damage the reputations of opposition parties in the Australian federal election held in May last year. But it was a different experience in the US.
In the US, what I have seen was pretty much grassroots voters wanting to use WeChat to sort of galvanize, if you like, to polarize people's view, and there is a lot of sort of disinformation, if you like, in the process of doing that. So it's not so much. I haven't seen so much the politicians, the candidate themselves using WeChat directly, but that actually the Trump fans or the grassroots voters picking up on very local issues, and then sort of because of that kind of disinformation, then a lot of conspiracies and simply untrue kind of information get bandied around and circulated, and that's kind of unfortunate in the sense that because a significant percentage of the first generation PRC migrants do not necessarily read news and discussions on platforms other than WeChat. In other words, if they only read what's being published and posted on WeChat and do not actually engage in the process of verifying, fact checking and so on and so forth, then they are very easily misled. So that is why, even though all social media platforms engage in disinformation, in misinformation, it is particularly quite sort of pernicious when it comes to a population that do not cross-check and do not actually verify the sources of information, but actually rely on such information. And that's not very different whether it's US or Australia.
So what Professor Wanning Sun is seeing here very closely echoes what the West has seen with Facebook, especially with older voters, the baby boomers. They're not fact-checking, they're only staying within their echo chamber, and it's leading to the rise of disinformation and conspiracy theories.
So okay, Boomer, let's just get this clear. Chinese people in the United States are spreading fake news in favor of Donald Trump. Should I tweet this to him?
Well, not yet, because Professor Wanning Sun also witnessed something else. Something that she described as a minor cultural revolution that occurred in American WeChat groups in the past few months.
Having just said that WeChat had been pretty much used as a platform for the conservative side, recent development in this space has given me hope that the people on the left have now also actively exploring ways of using WeChat for public debate, for civic action. With the death of George Floyd and with the Black Lives Matter movement becoming very prevalent, if you like, in the American society, the younger generation of Chinese migrants in the US, and we in our sort of academic jargon, we call them 1.5 generations. That is, their parents migrated to the US and to Australia, probably during the post-Tiananmen sort of time during the 80s and 90s. And their children are growing up and they're going to universities in the US, and they are getting educated and they are engaged with the intellectual sort of movements and the thoughts. And what precipitated this debate within the American Chinese community was an open letter that was penned by a young woman. Her name is Eileen Huang, and she is a third-year English major studying at Yale University. And so she published this open letter to the Chinese Americans of her parents' generation, basically saying that we Chinese in this society have always complained that we have been victimized by racism, but we also have the tendency to look down upon other racial minorities, and that is not right. We should, find a way to form solidarities. And so basically she criticized the Chinese community for being conservative in this way, and she sort of encouraged people to explore the possibility of engaging in racial solidarity matters by going beyond the self-interest of self-preservation, self-interest.
So what happened next?
So when she put this letter on WeChat, it just went viral, and it was read very widely by the Chinese community in the US, as well as the rest of the Chinese diaspora. In Australia, we are also picking up on that and debated about that as well. Also drew a lot of criticism from people of her parents' generation, and these people who are of her parents' generations are pretty much those people that we have mentioned before, people on the right, the conservative people. And so there's, and then the people on the right also, published open letter. It's directly confronting her points of view. So the debate precipitating a quite widespread kind of debate with more people joining, supporting Eileen Huang, and those people supporting her critics and detractors. And there was be open letters flying around everywhere. And so all these were enabled to some extent by WeChat. So this is an example to me whereby a social media platform that is usually identified by the liberal Western commentators as an instrument of control of Chinese propaganda, but it's actually pretty much used in a very productive way to politicize the American Chinese population in a very positive kind of ways. I think it is nothing short of a modern cultural revolution in the sense that it is happening for the first time. A debate of this scale, of this kind of level of involvement happened between the first generation PRC migrant and the second generation PRC migrant. As you probably have observed that, the Chinese are not wanting to talk about politics and not to want to bring the politics to the dinner table. So even children do not necessarily agree with their parents. They know better than to engage with their parents directly. They leave their politics at the door when they come home to visit mom and dad. But this is the first time that the younger generations are getting educated. They are integrated with the left political forces in the mainstream society in America, and then confronting their parents about it. And also for the first time, their parents are forced to engage with the younger generation, not just simply condescendingly as their children, naive children, but as forces, cultural forces to be reckoned with. So that is why I find this quite interesting space to watch.
Mimi, do you ever talk politics with your family at a dinner table?
I do with my mom, but I often have to remind her to fact-check her information, which she picked up from Facebook. I found that a lot of the news she consumed was mainly straying from misinformation and rumors, and that sometimes it was just so hard to have an informed conversation with her. So what about you, Kinling?
My parents often ask me about the authenticity of some of the messages they got from their friends too. So this is exactly what Professor Swan reckons is why this debate and discussion about Black Lives Matter on American WeChat was so revolutionary.
It's also kind of radical or revolutionary in the sense that there is this kind of stereotype or this kind of perception that the Chinese diaspora are not political animals. They are only interested in doing business and in making money. And so there's the kind of perception that sometimes is internalized by the Chinese communities themselves. And so, but this recent sort of phenomenon, if you like, kind of challenged that. If to the extent that was true, then these things seems to be, there is hope that things are changing. But to what extent this is changing, and is this going to keep going in that way, and is this kind of cultural debate going to continue, remains to be seen. But I think it's a space to watch.
If you're in the US, maybe you have only 30 or 40 days to watch this space, but someone who has spent years watching WeChat, along with how the Chinese authorities are watching it, is this man.
I'm Ron Diebert. I'm professor of political science and director of the Citizen Lab at the University of Toronto's Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy.
And as you heard at the start of this episode, the Citizen Lab has for years led the world in revealing the extent of WeChat censorship. They've also revealed how WhatsApp gets hacked by Israeli technology, and more recently, about the security loopholes threatening privacy in Zoom. Here's how he describes the work they do.
Basically, we take an impartial, evidence-based approach to examining digital security issues that arise out of human rights concerns. So we employ a lot of technical methods and tools and data to dig beneath the surface of what's going on. And we don't have any particular axe to grind, meaning we're not an advocacy group. We just let the evidence speak for itself, and that takes us to many interesting places and does allow us to see what's happening perhaps before the general public is aware of it.
Back in May, the Citizen Lab released a report titled WeChat Surveillance Explained. So, was he surprised by Trump's executive orders over TikTok and WeChat?
I wouldn't say I was surprised by the executive orders. There was, of course, some discussion leading up to them by Trump himself on Twitter. He didn't mention WeChat, but he certainly was, floating the idea of TikTok. So maybe WeChat being included was a little bit of a surprise, but I suspected something was up. I didn't quite expect it to be so extreme. It's one thing for President Trump to utter some kind of vague threat on Twitter. It's another to actually see an executive order on paper, which of course, that act alone, the mere executive order, causes chaos and stock prices to take a hit. People have to start scrambling. I also was thinking about our own research in relation to this, and my first concern was, oh no, is our research cited in the executive order? And thankfully, there's an allusion to researchers have identified concerns with surveillance.
There's a reason why Ron and the Citizen Lab might be wondering if they were mentioned in Trump's executive orders. Here's a direct quote from the report.
Outcomes from such investigations could include banning certain sectors of government from using the service, or even compelling app stores to delist it based on national security threats.
Which almost sounds exactly like what Mike Pompeo and Donald Trump said and did last week.
Yeah, I also looked back at that and wondered, okay, didn't expect it to happen, but there you go. It certainly did. For the record, I don't think that's I think the responses, as I said, are extreme, and considering that they're part of this major dispute between the two countries and really quite a heated atmosphere, lots of ramped up political rhetoric, anti-China rhetoric, I don't believe it was well thought out. I think it strikes me like much else the Trump administration does. It's a knee-jerk reaction, highly politicized of the moment, as opposed to something well articulated and thought out in relation to a larger strategy, and especially coordinated with like-minded countries. I think this is something that should be dealt with by a coalition of countries collectively and thought through carefully in terms of what the right response is. I don't think it's a good thing. I think what WeChat is doing, what China as a whole is doing in terms of its information control regime, I think we need to respond to it, but this is not the right response.
The interesting thing about this WeChat story is that it came out just a fortnight after the US Congressional Hearings into big tech, like Google, Amazon, and Facebook, and revelations of how they were using and abusing the privacy and the data of their customers.
Well, I think this is all part of a rather encouraging trend, actually, that lawmakers, for better or for worse, I mean, it's not perfect, but for better or for worse, they're beginning to grapple with and understand the consequences of having a communications environment that surrounds us that has as its central feature these applications and platforms that drill into our personal lives as part of the organization of the economy, surveillance capitalism, as it's been called by Shoshana Zuboff. And so it's encouraging to me that you have lawmakers interested in this, and the public, especially at the time that we're in, so dependent on technology as a lifeline, discussions of contact tracing applications and location tracking, for people to think more carefully about what goes on beneath the surface is a major goal of myself professionally and my colleagues at Citizen Lab. That said, when you look at the hearings themselves, there is a lot of theater, not much depth in terms and substantive depth among a lot of the lawmakers when it comes to their questions to the tech executives. It's possible they could be better informed about what some of these issues are.
So let's get back to this report about WeChat that Ron and the Citizen Lab team put out in May this year. The big revelation was that WeChat has two ways of managing the customer data. One for those with phone numbers in mainland China, and one for people overseas. How did they discover this?
To explain it well, I think we need to go back a bit and understand how WeChat itself operates. So we had a report, I believe it was maybe 2 years ago now, where we determined that WeChat treats its audience, its customer base differently depending on whether they're registered in mainland China or registered from an international phone number. We called it one app, two systems, playing off the I guess no longer Hong Kong arrangement. And we noticed in that analysis that we did that there was censorship on WeChat. It's largely lacking transparency. In other words, you send a message and any topic that's deemed forbidden, any combination of keywords, any images that are sent will be removed in transit by WeChat's servers so that they just don't appear on a recipient's end, and no notification is given on either side. So if I send you a message, hey, how about those protests in Hong Kong? Look at this picture. You might not receive it, and I wouldn't know you didn't receive it. So it's a very insidious form of filtering above all else. But we found that this didn't apply to international users. They were treated separately. Obviously, to us, this seemed like a strategy to try to build the market for WeChat out internationally. There's probably close to 100 million people who use it outside of mainland China, of course, used very largely by the diaspora population. So that was a very significant finding, I think, and it was curious to us. Afterwards, of course, people were asking, well, there's no censorship for me if I'm an international user of WeChat, but is there surveillance? That's very difficult to determine on an empirical basis, using evidence. Surveillance is often something that is kind of passively done, and it doesn't leave a trace. There are some exceptions, but certainly in the case of WeChat, where a lot of the censorship and filtering and potential surveillance takes place within the company's data centers, it's hard to actually get some visibility into what's going on unless you're actually inside them.
And there was another disturbing revelation about data for overseas users of WeChat. It involved the privacy policies for people who downloaded WeChat outside of China.
We looked very closely at their privacy policies. So if you're registered WeChat user outside of mainland China, you're subject to a different terms of service. It's under Singapore jurisdiction. And so you read the terms of service, and we went through it very carefully, and we saw, okay, there's no description of what's happening that we can observe here. So that's a big problem. So users, as I say, when they're sharing content and they think, well, nothing's going on, I'm just sharing content, I don't see any observable interference, they don't know that at the same time, that data is being collected by WeChat proper. It's taken to the company's technology, right? It's taken to its servers and used to help better refine essentially the database and the algorithms that then are used to filter, to intercept and remove content that is politically sensitive. So these type of machine learning algorithms improve themselves over time and through iteration. The more they can see an image or variations of an image, like let's take an example, Tank Man. Everyone knows Tank Man standing in front of Tiananmen Square. Maybe there are different variations of it. And so the more they can see images like that, the better their algorithms will be able to identify it among Chinese mainland users. And so that's what we mean that, as you're communicating, you're actually inadvertently or unwittingly helping to train those algorithms. And furthermore, I'd say this is equally problematic, is that we sent letters to Tencent outlining our findings, asking for comment, and they didn't respond to them. So both of those show a kind of callous disregard for users and researchers, in our case, which is symptomatic. It's not a China issue. It's symptomatic of the entire social media space.
Now, when this podcast gets posted on YouTube, there will most likely be a number of comments that say the same basic thing. Facebook, Google, or manipulate content posted by their users. Now you might remember that the South China Morning Post is based here in Hong Kong. And in 2013, we were one of the newspapers contacted about the arrival of a man called Edward Snowden, who went on to reveal the extent of surveillance we are all under by the Five Eyes security alliance led by American intelligence agencies. So we had to ask, how would Ron compare these findings about WeChat with the broader picture shown to us by Snowden about the level of surveillance being undertaken via social networks and our digital devices?
Well, yes, I see them very much of a piece of a larger set of problems. In fact, I have a book coming out next month, and Edward Snowden actually gave an endorsement for the book. It's on the front cover, and I was very grateful for that. And I have a chapter at the beginning of the book where I reflect on my own experiences and the experiences of my team at Citizen Lab when we were entrusted with some of the Snowden documents and we're providing the Canadian-related Snowden documents, interpretations and our analysis of them for the Canadian media. And the biggest thing that struck out to me at the time wasn't so much what the governments were doing in and of themselves. That was pretty alarming, but it was something I was very familiar with already, given my background and my understanding of military intelligence. What was more surprising to me was the way they had leveraged what they were doing. They had leveraged the data collection that was going on by the private sector. And this is something I think people don't understand about China's information control regime. They assume that there is a monolithic state that is administering all of this and deciding on a minute-by-minute basis what should be filtered, what's not, what's censored, and so on. That's not the impression I get at all from our research. It's much messier, but I believe even more effective for that reason. So the responsibilities are passed down to private companies to police their users. So it's less like a brick wall that you could circumvent easily, jump over. It's more like a series of overlapping trawling nets is the way that I think about it, which is messy, distributed, and so on, but actually ends up catching more or creating a climate of self-censorship. It's more effective. And of course, governments on their own could not come close to what the private sector around the personal data surveillance economy has done so effectively over the last 10 years by burying themselves into our devices that we carry with us 24 hours a day. We sleep with them, and they're monitoring everything that we do for commercial purposes. To the extent that governments can piggyback off that, why build something themselves?
Less like a wall, more like a series of nets.
We still don't know how this ban will actually be implemented. So as we say often on this podcast, this is a developing story. And this one has a deadline in about 40 days or so. So remember, get the latest news and updates on SCMP.com.
That's all we have for you from Inside China this week. My name is Kinling Lo.
And my name is Mimi Lau. Thank you so much for listening. Please leave us a comment and review. We would really like to hear from you. Stay tuned to our next Inside China podcast.
For more podcasts from the South China Morning Post, head to scmp.com, where you can hear more about technology, trade, culture, and society. For more podcasts from the South China Morning Post, head to scmp.com, where you can hear more about technology, trade, culture, and society.